The most dangerous person in the room is often the one nobody notices until it's too late. The divorce papers lay perfectly flat on the polished walnut table, their crisp white edges glowing beneath the warm pendant lights hanging above. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline shimmered against the fading colors of a late autumn evening. Cars moved like streams of gold and red beneath the glass towers, and somewhere far below, the city carried on as if nothing important was happening. But for Charlotte Whitmore, everything was changing. Ethan Carter sat across from her, adjusting the cuff of his expensive navy suit. His jaw was tight, not angry, just impatient. The way people looked when they had already moved on from a decision long before speaking it aloud. For several seconds, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched across the dining room they had once chosen together, in a penthouse they had once filled with plans. The grandfather clock near the staircase ticked softly. 1 second, then another, then another. Finally, Ethan pushed the papers forward. I think this is best for both of us. Charlotte lowered her eyes toward the documents. Her face revealed nothing. No surprise, no panic, no desperate questions. The attorney seated near the end of the table shifted slightly, almost expecting resistance. Instead, Charlotte calmly picked up the pen. Ethan watched her carefully, waiting, maybe hoping for tears, maybe expecting anger, something that would justify the choice he had already made. But she simply read each page, slowly, carefully, the way she always did everything. She turned one page, then another, then another. The attorney cleared his throat. Ethan glanced toward the windows. Charlotte signed her name. One smooth signature. No hesitation, no trembling hand. Just Charlotte Whitmore. The sound of the pen leaving the paper seemed louder than anything else in the room. Ethan blinked. That's it, he asked. Charlotte looked up. Her blue eyes remained calm. What else would there be? The question caught him off guard. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across his face before disappearing behind confidence. I thought you'd have something to say. A faint smile touched her lips. Not bitter, not sad, just distant. You made your decision. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Relief settled into his posture. He looked like a man who believed he had finally removed the biggest obstacle standing between him and the future he wanted. You'll be fine, he said. You're strong. Charlotte folded her copy of the papers. I know. Again, not the answer he expected. The attorney gathered the documents. Chairs shifted. Pens clicked. The meeting ended with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. 20 minutes later, Charlotte stepped into the private elevator carrying a single leather handbag. Nothing more. The elevator doors closed. She watched the numbers descend. 52, 51, 50. Her reflection stared back from the mirrored walls. Calm, controlled, untouched. When the doors finally opened into the marble lobby, the doorman immediately straightened. Good evening, Mrs. Carter. Charlotte paused, then offered a small smile. Not anymore. She walked through the revolving doors and into the cool evening air. The wind carried the scent of rain and distant traffic. Across the street, office lights glowed high above the city. For the first time in years, she stood completely alone. No husband, no expectations, no performance. Her phone vibrated inside her handbag. Once, then again. She glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. No name attached. Just a secure private line she recognized instantly. Charlotte answered. Hello. The voice on the other end was respectful, formal, almost nervous. Miss Whitmore. Charlotte stopped walking. Around her, strangers hurried along the sidewalk without noticing. Yes. There was a brief pause. Then the voice spoke again. The board is waiting for you. Charlotte stood motionless beneath the glow of a street lamp, while the city flowed around her in a blur of headlights and hurried footsteps. The voice on the phone remained patient. It did not need to explain who the board was. It did not need to explain why they were waiting. Some truths had existed for so long they no longer required introductions. I will be there tomorrow morning, Charlotte said quietly. They have all confirmed attendance, the voice replied, including the New York delegation. Charlotte closed her eyes for a brief moment. Thank you, Daniel. The call ended. She slipped the phone back into her handbag and continued walking down the sidewalk. A cold breeze lifted a strand of blonde hair across her cheek. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to exhale fully. Across town, Ethan was probably celebrating. Not publicly. Not yet. But privately, he would already be imagining the future. Promotions, bigger opportunities, a new beginning without the quiet woman he had spent years overlooking. The irony would have amused her if it did not feel so familiar. Because Ethan was not the first person to underestimate Charlotte Whitmore. He was simply the latest. Years earlier, when they first met, he had noticed her smile before anything else. They met at a charity fundraiser near Lake Michigan. Ethan had arrived with ambitious friends and expensive plans. Charlotte had arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress and carrying herself with effortless calm. She remembered the way people gravitated toward Ethan. He was charismatic, confident, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. Charlotte had liked that about him. At the time, his confidence felt reassuring. She had not yet learned how easily confidence could become arrogance. During their first year together, Ethan often joked that Charlotte was the least ambitious person he had ever met. She would laugh and change the subject. When his friends discussed investments, acquisitions, and market forecasts, she listened politely without offering opinions. What none of them knew was that Charlotte understood every topic being discussed. In some cases, she understood them far better than they did. She simply had no interest in proving it. The pattern continued after their wedding. Ethan climbed higher within his company, while Charlotte quietly stepped further into the background. At family gatherings, his relatives often asked what she did with her time. Charlotte enjoys a slower life. Ethan would answer before she could speak. His mother would smile politely. His brother would nod with barely disguised judgment. Someone would inevitably mention how fortunate Charlotte was to have Ethan providing such a comfortable lifestyle. Charlotte never corrected them. She thanked them for dinner and helped clear the table. Once, during a Christmas gathering in Aspen, Ethan's father spent 20 minutes explaining basic investment principles to her, as if she had never opened a financial newspaper. Charlotte listened respectfully. When he finished, he looked pleased with himself. The next morning, she quietly arranged a donation that saved a struggling community center from closing. Nobody connected the funding to her. Nobody asked where the money came from. That was how she preferred it. Throughout the years, small moments accumulated like snowflakes before a storm. Ethan stopped asking her opinion on major decisions. His colleagues referred to her as supportive but unremarkable. Even the household staff occasionally assumed she had little influence over anything important. Charlotte rarely reacted. She understood something most people never learned. Power announced itself when it was insecure. Real power did not need introductions. As she reached the corner of Michigan Avenue, a black sedan rolled silently to the curb beside her. The driver stepped out immediately. "Miss Whitmore," he said respectfully as he opened the rear door. Charlotte paused before getting in. She looked up at the towers surrounding the city skyline. Hundreds of windows glowed against the night. Somewhere among them, Ethan believed he was finally stepping into a larger world. Charlotte settled into the back seat. The door closed softly behind her. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, the lights of Chicago reflected across the tinted glass. Tomorrow morning, for the first time in years, she would stop pretending to be small. The black sedan crossed the city before turning onto a private roadway hidden behind wrought iron gates. The skyline slowly disappeared in the rear window, replaced by rows of carefully maintained trees illuminated by discreet landscape lighting. Charlotte sat quietly in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap. The driver never attempted conversation. He had worked for the Whitmore family for nearly 12 years. He understood the value of silence. 25 minutes later, the sedan rolled to a stop in front of a limestone estate overlooking Lake Michigan. The house stretched across nearly 20,000 square feet, its warm lights glowing against the darkness like a beacon from another world. Most people never knew it existed. Even Ethan had never seen it. During their marriage, Charlotte had always explained her occasional absences with simple excuses: visiting relatives, charity events, personal commitments. Ethan had never asked many questions. He assumed there was nothing important enough to require answers. The front door opened before she reached the steps. An older woman with silver hair greeted her with a gentle smile. "Welcome home, Miss Whitmore." Charlotte returned the smile. "Thank you, Margaret." Inside, everything remained exactly as she remembered. Marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. Original paintings lined the walls. The scent of fresh cedar drifted from the library at the end of the hall. Her grandfather had loved cedar. Even years after his passing, the house still carried traces of him. Charlotte paused beside a portrait hanging above the grand staircase. William Whitmore looked back at her with the same calm expression she saw every morning in her own mirror. He had built Whitmore Global from a regional manufacturing company into one of the largest private holdings in the world. Shipping, infrastructure, energy, technology, real estate. The empire touched industries most people never connected together. Yet throughout her childhood, he had repeated the same lesson. Wealth was a tool, not an identity. The moment money becomes the most interesting thing about you, he once told her, you become the least interesting person in the room. Charlotte had never forgotten those words. The following morning arrived with clear skies and sunlight reflecting across the lake. By 7 o'clock, she stood near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the water while Margaret adjusted the sleeve of her tailored cream-colored jacket. The transformation was subtle. Charlotte did not suddenly appear different. She simply looked like someone who no longer needed to hide. A black folder rested on the nearby table. Inside were reports, forecasts, acquisitions, and proposals worth billions of dollars. At 8 o'clock sharp, another vehicle arrived. Then another, and another. Executives from New York, Boston, Dallas, Seattle. Men and women whose names regularly appeared on financial networks entered the estate with quiet professionalism. Every one of them carried the same expression. Respect. Not because of the Whitmore name alone, because Charlotte had spent years earning it. By 8:30, the boardroom overlooking the lake was nearly full. Conversations flowed in measured tones. Tablets illuminated with financial data rested beside steaming coffee cups. Then the room fell silent. Charlotte entered. Every person immediately stood. No announcement was necessary. No introduction was needed. The chairman pulled back her seat at the head of the table. Charlotte thanked him softly before sitting down. Through the massive windows, sunlight sparkled across the water. Inside, dozens of executives waited for her first words. Thousands of employees across multiple continents would eventually feel the effects of decisions made in this room. Charlotte opened the black folder and glanced at the agenda. For a brief moment, her thoughts drifted back to Ethan. At that exact hour, he was probably arriving at his office believing his life had finally become simpler. Believing the quiet woman he had dismissed belonged somewhere behind him. Charlotte closed the folder and looked around the room. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "Let us begin." The meeting continued for nearly 4 hours. Numbers moved across screens. Reports changed hands. Forecasts were challenged, defended, and refined. Yet throughout the entire discussion, Charlotte spoke less than anyone else in the room. She did not need long speeches. She asked questions. Precise questions. The kind that exposed weaknesses hidden beneath polished presentations. The kind that forced executives to think more carefully before answering. By noon, 3 major acquisitions had been approved. 2 international partnerships had been delayed pending further review. 1 proposed expansion had been rejected entirely, not because it lacked profit potential, but because Charlotte believed the risk outweighed the reward. Nobody argued. They had learned years ago that when Charlotte reached a conclusion, it was rarely based on impulse. It was based on information they had not yet considered. As the meeting adjourned, executives gathered their documents and prepared to leave. Several stopped to speak with her individually. Others simply nodded respectfully before exiting. Within minutes, the massive boardroom stood nearly empty. Only Daniel remained. He approached with a tablet in his hand. "There is one additional matter," he said. Charlotte looked up from her notes. "What is it?" Daniel placed the tablet on the table and turned the screen toward her. A company profile appeared. Charlotte immediately recognized the name. Carter Strategic Development. Ethan's company. Her expression remained unchanged. "Go on." Daniel hesitated briefly. "They have submitted a request to participate in the Horizon Infrastructure Initiative." Charlotte leaned back in her chair. Horizon was one of the largest projects Whitmore Global had launched in over a decade. Billions of dollars. Multiple states. Thousands of jobs. The opportunity alone could transform a mid-sized company into a major national player. "Have they passed the preliminary review?" she asked. "Yes." "Financially stable?" "Yes." "Competitive proposal?" "Very." Daniel studied her face carefully. "Would you like me to remove them from consideration?" The question lingered between them. Through the windows, sunlight shimmered across the lake. Charlotte looked out at the water for several seconds before answering. "No." Daniel seemed surprised. "No. The evaluation process exists for a reason. Charlotte closed the folder in front of her. If their proposal deserves consideration, it receives consideration. Regardless of personal history, a faint smile appeared. Especially regardless of personal history. Daniel nodded slowly. It was exactly the answer he should have expected. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in downtown Chicago, Ethan sat in a conference room overlooking the river. Unlike Charlotte's morning, his had been filled with celebration. Investors were optimistic. Senior managers were energized. For the first time in years, his company stood within reach of a breakthrough opportunity. If we land Horizon, everything changes, one executive said. Revenue triples within 3 years. Another nodded enthusiastically. This is the biggest opportunity we have ever seen. Ethan smiled. He enjoyed moments like these. The confidence, the momentum, the feeling that success was finally catching up to his ambitions. Nobody in the room knew how close they were to the truth. Not the truth they imagined. The real truth. They discussed strategies for the next hour. Potential partnerships. Expansion plans. Hiring projections. By the time the meeting ended, Ethan felt certain the future belonged to him. Back at the estate, Charlotte stepped onto a stone terrace overlooking Lake Michigan. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of water and distant pine. Her phone vibrated softly. A message from Daniel. One sentence. The Horizon Selection Committee has scheduled final presentations for next month. Charlotte read the message once before locking the screen. Somewhere ahead, paths that had separated were beginning to move toward the same destination. Neither side could see the entire picture yet, but the pieces were quietly falling into place. 3 weeks passed. Autumn gradually surrendered to early winter, and Chicago's skyline wore a colder shade of gray each morning. During that time, Ethan barely thought about Charlotte. He was too busy chasing what looked like the biggest opportunity of his career. Horizon had become the center of every conversation inside Carter Strategic Development. Analysts reviewed projections. Consultants refined presentations. Senior managers worked late into the evening preparing materials for the final selection process. Everywhere Ethan looked, he saw momentum. The company had never been stronger. One Friday afternoon, he stood near the glass wall of his office while snow drifted lightly over the river below. His chief financial officer entered carrying a stack of reports. The latest numbers came in, she said. If we secure Horizon, our valuation could increase by nearly 300% within 36 months. Ethan smiled. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. She handed him the report. There is more. Ethan glanced down. Good more. Very good more. She pointed toward a highlighted section. Several institutional investors have already expressed interest. They are waiting to see the outcome. Ethan nodded slowly. Every piece seemed to be falling into place. The promotion he wanted. The recognition he deserved. The financial success he had spent years pursuing. For the first time in a long while, the future appeared simple. Predictable. Within reach. Across the city, Charlotte's days followed a very different rhythm. Most mornings began before sunrise. She reviewed international reports while the lake remained hidden beneath darkness. She attended meetings involving projects spread across multiple continents. Energy grids, transportation corridors, advanced technology partnerships. Entire industries moved quietly through the reports crossing her desk. Yet nobody outside a small circle knew how much influence she carried. That anonymity had become a habit she no longer needed, but still appreciated. One evening, Daniel entered her office carrying a folder marked Horizon Initiative. He placed it on the desk. The final shortlist has been approved. Charlotte looked up from her screen. How many remain? 4. And Carter Strategic Development? Still included. Charlotte opened the folder and reviewed the summary. Ethan's company ranked higher than she expected. The proposal was disciplined, efficient, ambitious without becoming reckless. She felt a brief sense of satisfaction. Ethan had always been talented. That had never been the problem. The problem was that talent sometimes convinced people they could see the entire world when they were only seeing a small corner of it. The presentation schedule is confirmed, Daniel said. All candidates will appear before the committee next month. Charlotte closed the folder. Good. Daniel studied her expression. Do you think he knows? Charlotte almost laughed. Knows what? Who controls the final decision? She shook her head gently. No. Outside the office windows, the lake reflected the final colors of sunset. Gold fading into deep blue. Calm. Silent. Certain. Meanwhile, Ethan was celebrating another successful week. That night, he attended a private networking event at an upscale hotel downtown. Investors, executives, and industry leaders filled the ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers. Conversations flowed easily. Opportunities seemed endless. At one point, a venture capital executive raised a glass toward him. "I hear your company is positioned well for Horizon." Ethan smiled confidently. "We like our chances. If you win it, everything changes." Ethan looked around the room. At the expensive suits, the influential faces, the future he imagined waiting just beyond reach. "Trust me," he said. "Everything is already changing." What he could not see was that somewhere beyond the lights of the city, another meeting was being scheduled. Another room was being prepared. And when those doors finally opened, the person waiting inside would change everything he thought he knew. The final presentation schedule arrived on a Monday morning. Snow covered the sidewalks outside Ethan's office, turning the city into a landscape of white and silver beneath a pale winter sky. The email appeared in his inbox just after 8 o'clock. Horizon Infrastructure Initiative. Final candidate presentations. Ethan opened it immediately. His eyes moved through the details. Date, time, location, requirements. Everything he had been waiting for. A slow smile spread across his face. This was it. The opportunity that could change the trajectory of his company forever. Within minutes, he called an executive meeting. Senior managers filled the conference room carrying laptops, reports, and fresh coffee. Energy filled the space. Optimism seemed to radiate from every seat around the table. "We made the final round," Ethan announced. The room erupted with excitement. Congratulations echoed across the table. Several executives exchanged relieved smiles. Months of preparation had brought them to this point. "Now we finish strong," Ethan continued. "No mistakes. No assumptions. We walk into that room prepared better than anyone else." Everyone nodded. They believed him. More importantly, Ethan believed himself. Across Lake Michigan, Charlotte sat in her private office reviewing the same schedule. Unlike Ethan, she showed no visible reaction. She simply placed the document into a folder and continued reading another report. To anyone watching, the Horizon process looked like one project among hundreds. Yet Daniel understood better. He stood near the window, overlooking the frozen shoreline. "The committee has requested your attendance for all presentations," he said. Charlotte looked up. That was expected. Most candidates still do not know who holds final approval authority. Charlotte returned her attention to the report. That was also expected. Daniel smiled faintly. Even after years working beside her, he occasionally found her ability to remain calm remarkable. Most people carrying her level of influence enjoyed displaying it. Charlotte seemed determined to hide it whenever possible. The days passed quickly. Preparation intensified on both sides. Ethan rehearsed presentations late into the evening. Financial models were refined repeatedly. Visual materials were redesigned. Every number received another review. Every forecast faced another challenge. The closer the meeting approached, the more confident he became. Industry analysts were already discussing Carter's strategic development as one of the strongest candidates. Investors continued expressing interest. Opportunities multiplied. Success felt inevitable. One evening, after another long meeting, Ethan stopped at a restaurant overlooking the river. The dining room buzzed with quiet conversation and soft music. As he waited for his table, he noticed a familiar face seated across the room. Charlotte. For the first time since the divorce, he saw her in person. She sat alone near the windows, reviewing documents while a cup of tea rested beside her. She looked exactly as he remembered. Calm, composed, unremarkable, or at least that was what he told himself. For a moment, he considered walking over. Then he dismissed the idea. Their lives had moved in different directions. There was no reason to reopen old conversations. Before he could think further, a man in an expensive suit approached Charlotte's table. Ethan recognized him instantly. Richard Langley, one of the most respected corporate advisors in the country. The kind of person whose schedule was booked months in advance. Ethan watched as Langley greeted Charlotte with unmistakable respect. Not casual politeness. Respect. The sight lingered in Ethan's mind longer than he expected. Yet when his table became available, he pushed the thought aside. Some people simply knew important people. It meant nothing. Across the room, Charlotte never noticed him. Her attention remained on the documents spread before her. Outside, Snow continued falling over the city. Quietly, patiently, and with every passing day, the distance between what Ethan believed and what was actually true grew smaller. Soon there would be no distance left at all. The morning of the final presentations arrived beneath a clear winter sky. Downtown Chicago glittered with fresh snow, sunlight reflecting from glass towers and frozen sidewalks alike. Ethan arrived nearly 40 minutes early. Preparation had become routine over the past month, but today felt different. Today carried weight. Possibility. The private conference center reserved for the Horizon Initiative occupied the upper floors of one of the city's most prestigious buildings. Security personnel greeted guests discreetly. Reception staff guided executives toward private meeting rooms. Everywhere Ethan looked, he saw people whose decisions shaped industries. He felt exactly where he belonged. His team gathered around him inside a waiting lounge furnished with dark leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows. Final documents were reviewed. Presentation materials were checked once more. Nobody wanted surprises. "We are ready," his chief financial officer said confidently. Ethan nodded. "Then let us finish this." One by one, the candidate companies were escorted toward their scheduled sessions. Some emerged looking optimistic. Others appeared uncertain. Hours passed. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the day progressed. Yet Ethan's confidence never wavered. Their proposal was strong. Their numbers were stronger. By early afternoon, a coordinator approached. "Mr. Carter, your presentation will begin in 15 minutes. Ethan stood. His team followed. Together, they moved down a quiet hallway lined with modern artwork and polished stone walls. The closer they came to the presentation room, the more anticipation filled the air. At the far end of the corridor stood a pair of tall walnut doors. Beyond them waited the committee responsible for recommending the final partnership. The coordinator stopped beside the entrance. "You may enter when the doors open." Ethan adjusted his tie. His team straightened jackets and gathered tablets. Everyone looked focused. Ready. The doors finally opened. Ethan stepped forward, then stopped. Something felt unusual immediately. Every seat inside the large conference chamber was occupied. Senior executives, advisors, committee members, industry leaders. Yet none of them appeared focused on the entrance. Instead, their attention remained fixed on the far end of the room. Ethan followed their gaze. A single chair stood at the head of the long conference table. Empty. Waiting. He frowned slightly. Perhaps another executive was about to arrive. Someone important. The coordinator gestured politely. "Please proceed." Ethan and his team entered. Conversations faded. The room settled into silence. He recognized several influential figures seated around the table, including people who rarely attended events personally. The sight should have excited him. Instead, a strange feeling began to settle in his chest. The empty chair remained untouched. Then the side door opened. Every person in the room immediately stood. Not some of them. All of them. Chairs moved softly across the floor. Executives who managed billion-dollar portfolios rose without hesitation. Committee members straightened. Advisors stepped aside respectfully. Ethan blinked. Confusion flickered across his face. The person entering was not a famous investor. Not a politician. Not a celebrity executive from New York. It was Charlotte. She walked calmly into the room wearing a tailored ivory suit, a slim black portfolio in one hand. No dramatic entrance. No announcement. No visible display of authority. Yet the reaction around her said everything. She acknowledged several people with a polite nod before taking her seat at the head of the table. Only after she sat did everyone else sit. Silence followed. Ethan remained standing for a fraction too long. His mind struggled to connect what his eyes were seeing. Across the table, Charlotte opened her portfolio and reviewed several documents. Completely composed. Completely at ease. As though she belonged there. As though she had always belonged there. For the first time since their divorce, uncertainty replaced confidence. Ethan slowly took his seat. The room felt different now. Smaller somehow. The assumptions he had carried for years began shifting beneath him. And somewhere deep inside, a question he had never bothered asking finally demanded an answer. Who was Charlotte Whitmore really? For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence inside the conference room felt strangely heavy, as though every person present understood something Ethan did not. Charlotte calmly reviewed the documents in front of her while committee members waited. There was no nervousness in her movements. No sign that she felt out of place. Quite the opposite. She looked exactly like someone sitting where she belonged. Ethan tried to focus on the presentation materials resting beside him, but his attention kept returning to the woman he thought he had known for years. Finally, the chairman seated near Charlotte cleared his throat. "Thank you all for joining us today." His voice carried easily across the room. "Before we begin the final presentations, there are several introductions that need to be made." Ethan listened carefully. The chairman turned toward Charlotte. "Many of you already know her. Some of you have worked with her for years. Others are meeting her in person for the first time." Several executives nodded respectfully. Ethan felt a strange tightening in his chest. The chairman continued, "It is my privilege to formally acknowledge the person responsible for guiding Whitmore Global into its next generation." Ethan froze. Whitmore Global. The words echoed in his mind. The chairman smiled warmly. "Miss Charlotte Whitmore, sole heir and majority controlling shareholder of Whitmore Global Holdings." The room remained perfectly still. Ethan felt as though the floor beneath him had shifted. Sole heir. Majority controlling shareholder. The words refused to fit beside the image he had carried for years. Charlotte, sitting quietly at family dinners. Charlotte, helping clear dishes after holidays. Charlotte, smiling politely while others spoke over her. Charlotte, whom everyone assumed depended on him. Suddenly dozens of memories returned at once. The unexplained trips. The phone calls she never discussed. The influential people who seemed unusually respectful whenever they crossed paths with her. The complete absence of concern whenever money was discussed. Details he had ignored because he never thought they mattered. Across the room, Charlotte looked toward the chairman and offered a small nod of appreciation. Nothing more. No speech. No dramatic acknowledgement. Her silence somehow carried more weight than any announcement could have. The chairman continued. "Under her leadership, Whitmore Global has expanded strategic investments across infrastructure, energy, logistics, and emerging technology while maintaining one of the strongest private balance sheets in the world." Ethan barely heard the rest. His thoughts raced backward through years of assumptions. Every judgment, every conclusion, every moment he believed he understood her. Beside him, members of his own team exchanged stunned glances. One executive quietly whispered, "My God." Another simply stared. The realization spread through the room like a ripple moving across still water. Charlotte finally looked in Ethan's direction. Their eyes met briefly. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction, no resentment, just calm recognition. The same calm she had carried on the day she signed the divorce papers. In that moment, Ethan understood something painful. She had never changed. Not really. The woman sitting at the head of the table was the same woman he had lived beside. The difference was not her. The difference was what he had failed to see. The chairman opened another folder. "Now that introductions are complete, we will proceed with the final evaluations." Charlotte folded her hands neatly on the table. Sunlight reflected from the windows behind her, illuminating the Chicago skyline beyond. Everything about the scene felt unreal to Ethan. Yet the reactions surrounding her left no room for doubt. The respect, the authority, the influence. It had all been there the entire time, hidden in plain sight. And as the presentation session officially began, Ethan realized he was no longer walking into the opportunity of a lifetime. He was walking into a room controlled by the woman he had once believed needed him. The presentations lasted for hours. Charts appeared on screens. Financial forecasts were debated. Questions were asked and answered. Yet for Ethan, the details gradually faded into the background. Every time he looked toward the head of the table, he saw Charlotte sitting there with the same calm expression she had worn throughout their marriage. The difference was that now everyone else seemed to see what he had failed to recognize. When Carter Strategic Development finished its presentation, the room fell silent. The proposal had been strong. Even Ethan knew that. Members of the committee exchanged notes while advisors reviewed final evaluations. Outside the windows, the winter sun slowly descended toward the skyline, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. Finally, the chairman stood. "Thank you to all participants. The committee has completed its review." The room became still. Years of work, months of preparation, and countless decisions had all led to this moment. The chairman opened a folder and glanced briefly toward Charlotte before continuing. "After careful consideration, the Horizon Infrastructure Initiative will move forward with a strategic partner selected unanimously by the committee." Ethan straightened in his chair. The selected partner is Carter's strategic development. Applause filled the room. Relief washed through Ethan. His team exchanged smiles. Several executives shook hands. For a brief moment, everything felt exactly as he had imagined. Then the chairman raised his hand. The room quieted once more. There is one final requirement. Ethan's attention sharpened immediately. The chairman turned toward Charlotte. As majority controlling shareholder of Whitmore Global Holdings, final authorization remains with Miss Whitmore. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. Charlotte opened a thin folder resting beside her. She reviewed a single page before looking up. Her expression remained composed, neither warm nor cold, simply thoughtful. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. For the first time all day, uncertainty returned. Charlotte spoke softly, yet every person in the room heard her clearly. Carter Strategic Development submitted an excellent proposal. Several committee members nodded. The financial projections are realistic. The operational plan is disciplined. The leadership team has demonstrated competence. Ethan listened carefully. Hope returned. Then Charlotte continued. However, partnership requires more than competence. The room grew silent again. Whitmore Global places significant value on judgment. She paused briefly, especially the ability to recognize value before it becomes obvious. Ethan understood immediately, not because she mentioned the divorce, not because she accused him of anything. She did neither. Yet the meaning reached him all the same. Years of assumptions suddenly felt impossible to defend. Charlotte closed the folder. Therefore, I am declining final authorization for this partnership. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Ethan stared at her, not in anger, in disbelief. The opportunity he had spent months pursuing disappeared with a single sentence delivered in a calm voice. Yet somehow it did not feel like revenge. Charlotte had not insulted him. She had not embarrassed him. She had not exposed private wounds. She had simply made a decision, the same way she had signed the divorce papers months earlier. Quietly, professionally, without drama. She gathered her documents and stood. Everyone else rose with her. Before leaving, she looked toward Ethan one final time. I genuinely wish your company success, she said. Just not with this project. Then she walked toward the exit. The room remained silent as the door closed behind her. Later that evening, Charlotte stood alone beside the frozen shoreline outside her estate. The lake stretched endlessly beneath a darkening sky. A cold breeze moved across the water. Behind her stood an empire worth more money than most people could imagine. Ahead of her stretched a future entirely her own. She did not feel victorious because she had defeated someone. She felt free because she no longer needed to hide. Somewhere across the city, Ethan finally understood the lesson he had missed for years. Charlotte had never become powerful after the divorce. She had always been powerful. The only thing that changed was that she stopped pretending otherwise.